So good morning. My name is Brenda Clifton again. I'm a Senior Restoration Botanist for the Skagit River System Cooperative, and I'm going to present to you the Nookachamps Forks Phase 2 Restoration Project. For those of you who don't know me, I've been with the Skagit River System Cooperative for 12 years. I have a bachelor's degree in botany, a master's degree in environmental planning with a specialization in plant physiology, and I'm a certified professional wetland scientist for the Society of Wetland Scientists. The goal of this project will be to improve habitat and water quality for Chinook salmon, steelhead trout, and other species by restoring native riparian and floodplain vegetation. Specifically, we propose to plant and maintain native trees and shrubs on 30 acres along Barney Lake and Nookachamps Creek in the Skagit River floodplain. In the same area, we plan to control invasive species. The project is taking place in the Barney Lake Conservation Area, which is just to the east of Mount Vernon. Here's Barney Lake in the center of your screen. Here is Mount Vernon. The Skagit River runs along the top of your screen, and you can see Nookachamps Creek. The project is in a Tier 1 area according to the Skagit Watershed Council Year 2015 strategic approach. Barney Lake is a 371-acre conservation property owned by the Skagit Land Trust. The area is very iconic to the community, and there was a huge effort to set the land aside for conservation, including private property donations and 2 fundraising events to raise money to purchase the property. The property includes 9,700 feet of Nookachamps Creek and over 1,000 feet of East Nookachamps Creek. It also contains 130 acres of Barney Lake. Nookachamps Creek supports Chinook, chum, and coho salmon, and also steelhead and cutthroat trout. Barney Lake also supports large overwintering flocks of waterfowl, including ducks, trumpeter swans, snow geese, and Canada geese. To provide some context, there's a property to the east that is owned by the Clear Valley Mitigation Bank. They're proposing to restore 340 acres of wetland habitat and also plant over 80 acres of upland buffer. So together that's over 700 acres of conserved habitat. Here's a LiDAR of the property. You can see it's all very low elevation, the same elevation as the Skagit River. And when there are high water events in the Skagit River, they quickly back into Nookachamps Creek and the project area. Here's a well-timed picture taken in 2007 of a high water event, and you can see how much of the property is covered in water. In fact, one year, the Clear Valley farmers forgot to go get their big hay marshmallows. In the following spring, those marshmallows were washed up, not just onto the hillside, but into the trees onto the hillside, just to give you a sense of how much water comes into this site in the wintertime. Despite all the potential, there are quite a few habitat problems on the site. There's 150 acres of pasture, or mostly reed canary grass, with limited native vegetation. The site is on the 303D list for dissolved oxygen as a category 5, and temperature and bacteria as a category 4. So there are some serious water quality problems in Nookachamps Creek. The site contains a ton of reed canary grass and also blackberry, Canada thistle, and yellow flag iris. These factors are resulting in degraded riparian and floodplain conditions. The lack of vegetation in the buffer zone is reducing the amount of shade on the creek and increasing the temperatures. The lack of large trees in the floodplain and along the buffer zone is reducing large woody debris input, and the lack of functional vegetation is also not filtering pollutants coming into the stream and exacerbating the water quality problems. The project I'm proposing is phase 2. There have been quite a few other plantings at the site completed already. The Skagit Land Trust has completed 26 acres in crep plantings. That's the purple on the map. A large area up here along Barney Lake and an area here along Trumpeter Creek. And then in phase 1 of the project, so far, we have planted 39 acres with a combination of Surfboard and Washington Department of Ecology funds. So that's the pink in the map. Here is a picture of some phase 1 plantings along Nookachamps Creek, mostly willows. Here's a picture of a phase 1 planting that's a little bit higher elevation, and one of the rare areas we managed to sneak some conifers in. You can see that we're planting in these meandering rows. That is because the site is so filled with reed canary grass. We found it's really helpful to be able to get in there in the summer and mow these rows with our tractor. We found that our old way of doing things, of just mowing a little circle around the tree to reduce competition with reed canary grass, which is 4, 5, 6 feet tall, isn't really opening up enough light for the trees. So it's really helpful to get in and mow these large swaths of canary grass. In areas that are too wet to get our tractor in to mow, we've been doing these dense willow plantings. These willows are placed 3 feet apart, and they're 6-foot long stakes when we put them in. The idea is the 6-foot long stakes outcompete the reed canary grass from the get-go because they're so tall, and then the density of the plantings makes it so they quickly fill in, start shading out the canary grass, and reduce its strength. The theory for this planting is based on an article that came out in 2006 that looked at the survivorship of willow cuttings at different densities in canary grass with no maintenance. They looked at densities from 2 to 4 feet spacings, and they found that 3 feet spacings was a very cost-effective and had high survivorship. The King County has also been really effective at using this planting for quite a while, this type of planting. Here's a video of the planting so you can just get a sense. We planted hooker willow in the deepest areas, Pacific willow in the medium areas, and then cottonwoods in the upper areas. For phase 2, we are proposing to plant 30 more acres at the site. That's in pink on this map. We also plan to control weeds on the same 30 acres. The pink up around Barney Lake and along Nookachamps Creek is the proposed surfboard funded planting, along with this pilot planting that I will talk a lot about later. This pink in the middle is the match planting funded by the Department of Ecology. Here is a video of the planting area up by Barney Lake. You can see the crepe planting in the background. This is Nookachamps Creek in the foreground. This brown that is starting to appear in the upper right is Barney Lake. And then here's the planting area, which you can see is a massive swath of reed canary grass, and quite disappointing to see along the creek, the bank of such a productive creek, quite frankly. Here is a panorama of the same area that I threw in case the video didn't work and to give you a bit different perspective. Here's the sketchiness that I climbed up in order to get this video for you guys. So for the proposed planting area, we would go with two different methods. First and foremost, we would make a vegetation management plan to look at the ecology of the site and determine specific species and numbers to be planted. And then we would, in the upland areas, and I'm playing really fast and loose with the word upland, but basically the areas that dry out in the summer, we would plant in meandering rows like I showed you. We'd plant 600 to 700 plants per acre, which is more than the 500 that we normally plant per acre. We would do a mixture of species, mainly deciduous trees, but also conifers in areas that don't flood every single year, and willows in the lower areas. And it would be a mixture of potted and bare root stock. We would also use biodegradable plant protectors to protect against voles. In the lowland areas, or the areas that are too wet to use our tractor, we would do those dense willow plantings again, 6-foot tall willow stakes. These we put at least 1.5 feet deep into the ground to get them below the majority of the mass of the canary grass so they're not competing for water. This is actually 5,000 plants per acre. And along Barney Lake, we would install some beaver fencing. In this crepe planting here, they found that the beaver fencing was helpful, but not entirely effective against beaver herbivory. It turns out, though, King County was saying that these really dense willow plantings are actually helpful in the beaver areas because they're so dense. And once they get established, it's not actually a bad thing to have the beavers going in and thinning them out a little bit. For this pilot planting area, you'll see in phase 1, I've been able to plant for sure this dark brown canary grass and a lot of this green canary grass. But there are areas, this picture's in May, so there's more water than there'll be in the summer, but there are areas next to the creek that have been so full of water in the winter, I haven't been able to plant them, and they're just solid canary grass. So it would be nice to get some willows in a little bit closer to the creek. The reason this is a pilot planting is because I want to do something that we don't normally do, and that is install willows in the summer while they're not dormant, so we actually can get in there and get them planted. I would like to do this in 2 different timings. Articles that I have found where they do this online, they've done the plantings in June, but I would also like to try some in mid to late September, hopefully before it starts raining and maybe the willows are thinking about going to sleep. So 2 timings, 3 species of the willows that do the best in inundation. So Pacific willow, hooker willow, and scholar's willow. Then I'd like to plant in perpendicular rows going towards the creek with the different methods. And that way I can associate survivorship with elevation. I can see which of those techniques work the best and how deep I can get the plantings, and then use our LiDAR that came out in 2006 to determine the rest of the areas that I can plant. Sorry. Using this method, it would open up at least another 5 acres of potential planting areas along Nookachamps and Trumpeter Creek. It would also create methodologies that would allow other organizations to area, not the least of which would be this Clear Valley planting that's right on the other side of the property line. Here's a video of the pilot test planting area. I just took it right now, so there's more water than there would be in the summertime, but you can see that it's just all reed canary grass next to the creek, and it'd be really great to get some plants established out there. Here's a panorama of the same area. From phase 1, we've learned a few lessons that we are going to incorporate into phase 2. This is a difficult planting site with the canary grass and the flooding, and so we're going to do a higher planting density than we normally do, 600 to 700 trees per acre instead of 500. The site floods every year, and so we're only going to plant conifers in the highest elevations. Reed canary grass is abundant at the site, so as I mentioned, we're going to mow our higher areas with a tractor, and we're going to plant our lower areas in dense willow plantings. And then beavers have been problematic up around Barney Lake, so we're going to install beaver fencing. The deliverables of this project will be the vegetation management and planting plan, the as-built documentation that will include maps and numbers of plants put in. We'll have 30 acres with increased riparian and floodplain functionality from planted plants, and then 30 acres of reduced abundance of invasive species, which will be noticeable in the final walkthrough. For this project, we're asking for $255,000 from the SURF Board. We've already secured the match of $45,000 from the Washington Department of Ecology for a total project cost of $300,000. These costs are based on previous projects we've done in the Skagit Basin, which usually run from $9,000 to $11,000 per acre. With all of the challenges at the site and the denser plantings and the beaver fencing, we have adjusted the cost accordingly to $10,000 per acre. If funding comes in October, we're hoping to spend November and December putting together the planting plan, inventorying the habitat, doing weed inventories, and completing the cultural assessment. This upcoming planting season from January to April, we'd hope to plant 10 acres. The following summer, we would maintain those acres, control weeds, and plant the pilot planting area. The following planting winter, we would hope to plant the remainder of the planting area. For the rest of the grant, we would maintain all 30 acres and control weeds at the site. And then we plan to maintain those plantings for at least 3 to 5 years using this and other funding sources. The Skagit River System Cooperative would take the lead in overall project management and financial management. We would develop the planting plans and implement the invasive species control, planting, and maintenance. The Skagit Land Trust would take the lead if we do any volunteer plantings out there. We already did 2 in phase 1, and they were very successful. And they also have a land stewardship program that they run with 2 land stewards assigned to the site that they would continue to be the lead on. Constraints and uncertainties at the site. Since the primary project activity is planting native vegetation on conservation lands, constraints and liabilities are relatively limited. However, we did talk about the challenges presented by reed canary grass, flooding, and beavers at the site. I feel like we have come up with a plan to address these challenges. The site will definitely be maintained for 3 to 5 years after planting. We've found that keeping the competition from adjacent vegetation down is the most important aspect of having a successful planting site. If not funded, this project will continue to suffer environmental degradation on the sites, and work on this project will remain stagnant until funds are secured from another source. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. Are there any questions?